Everybody's familiar with Bob Herbert's now, I suppose, famous article, What Color Was That Baby?, where he talked about how when he was a city editor at some newspaper, they were going over stories that were going to be published the next morning, and during their scheduled meeting, the editor-in-chief asked whether or not a baby who had gone missing was black or white. Well, he didn't use those words. He just said, what color was that baby? Because, of course, everybody understood then as now, if the child is white, that means it's newsworthy. If the child is not white, specifically black, then it's not newsworthy at all. Bob Herbert made an interesting column, but the thing is he missed the real point. He missed the true mendacity of the white media. His whole deal was about whether or not the white media covered the disappearances of black children at all, whether or not they covered black people, period. I want to point to a far deeper problem, which is whenever they do report on black people, it's always according to a racist template. If the person is black, well, we got to find out what problems they got. And if they don't have any problems, well, do their family members do? Will somebody say something grimy about them? If they're white, doesn't matter if they're a mass murderer. Well, we got to break out the sad violins. We got to make sure that people understand these are human beings. These are people, you see. These are people. No matter how evil a white person's acts may be, no matter how vicious their crime, they have to be shown in a sympathetic light. That is also a white media template that Bob Herbert didn't talk about. I guess it's just a problem of he spent too much time around the wrong people. Well, over here, in the B1 Brigades, we actually speak reality. Let me give you a couple of case studies in how white criminality is covered up by the white media. This year, we have probably heard the story of Chris Watts, who murdered his wife and his own two daughters, ages 4 and 3. And he decided that his wife, who was pregnant with their third child, well, that didn't stop him from taking her life. That's bad enough. But it's what this Watts character did after the mass murder that shows being white is to be a protected class of criminal. Shannon Watts had gone on a business trip. When she came back on August 13th of this year, she and her two daughters disappeared. They weren't reported as missing by Chris Watts. Instead, they had to be reported missing by a family friend. The husband didn't seem to notice that his wife was missing. He didn't seem to think that that was suspicious. And apparently the police didn't think that Chris Watts' ignorance of his wife and children's disappearance was strange either, because they didn't immediately arrest him. Instead, they allowed the chief suspect in the disappearance of a pregnant woman and their two toddler-aged children to run around free for another 48 hours, because after all, it's not like he would flee the country or something. And it's not as if Chris Watts was laying low or hiding out somewhere where the cops couldn't find him. He was giving public interviews where he pretended to plead for the return of his wife and kids. All the while, Chris Watts knew that Shannon and his two toddler-aged children's bodies were rotting away in a shallow grave near a petroleum plant. But you see, as disgusting as this story is, it's just par for the course for what happens whenever white people commit crimes in America. The media decides that they're going to ignore it and overlook it, and the police decide that, well, we can't dare punish this man. Whenever a husband or wife is missing or killed, the chief suspect is always the spouse, because killers usually kill whomever is closest to them. But the police didn't arrest Chris Watts until 2 days after his wife and children were reported missing. Now, this is not a man. This is a monster. But you wouldn't know it by how the white media covered him. In typical white media fashion, they didn't focus on the horror of his crime. Every time that they started off with an article about him, it was always as if they were there to praise him, because that's the point. Whenever the killer is white, it instantly becomes a human interest story. The white media deliberately refused to focus on Chris Watts' complete and thorough unconcern for his missing pregnant wife and their two toddler-aged children. The white media didn't focus on Chris Watts' adulterous affair or the savagery of the murders he committed. Instead, Just as with Stephen Paddock, who murdered over 60 people in Las Vegas, the white media decided that instead of obsessing over the savagery of the crime, the callousness of his unconcern, instead they were going to obsess over this guy's financial condition. I'm not making that up, by the way. That's literally what the white media decided to focus on. Colorado husband arrested in murder of wife daughters had financial struggles. I guess this is meant to explain why he did it, and just look at the way that NBC News decided that they were going to open up this article. On social media, Chris and Shannon Watts were a smiling, picture-perfect couple from suburban Denver. They went on oceanfront vacations, cheered for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and doted on their 2 young daughters. Now, you know damn well that if this was a black man, what they would have said is, started off with this rap sheet, and if that wasn't enough, they would have started off with the bodies rotting away somewhere. They would have made sure that before you hear even what the guy's name is, you know that this is a bad guy. But when the killer is white, the very first thing that we hear about is how charming the guy is. Well, you would never suspect this. That's the white media's job. It is to make sure that the lie of white moral exceptionalism is maintained at all costs. It doesn't matter if this guy killed 4 people. His pregnant wife's unborn child counts as number 4. It doesn't matter if this guy was in the middle of an adulterous affair and decided he would slaughter his entire family because they were in the way. We're not going to worry about that. What we're going to worry about is this guy had financial problems. What the hell does that have to do with anything? It has to do with everything because it's the white media making sure, well, we want to make sure that you can identify with this guy. See, he has problems just like you. You got financial problems, well, so does he, you know. The guy was under stress, you see, under stress. And by the way, that is part of the white media's racist template. When it comes time to talk about white criminals, well, this is out of character for them. That's the message they're trying to get across. And I'll give you some more examples of that. Chris Watts is not the only one. We'll get to the other examples later. But there's more to this story that the white media doesn't tell you. Because this is blatant color-coded media coverage. And it's being driven by a racist white media who flagrantly praises and heaps adoration on white criminals and killers while demonizing black people who have merely been accused of a crime, no matter how flimsy the evidence against them. Whenever black people are alleged to be involved with drugs, it's only a criminal justice issue. And the narrative is just spoken boldly, loud and clear. We need more white cops. We need more prisons with white prison guards. And we need harsher sentences for all of these black criminals. It's always violent black thugs. You gotta have harsher drug laws because of the violence, drug violence, black violence. Well, what about crystal meth? These guys are out there having shootouts in the streets. They're killing people. Well, that's not a criminal justice issue. That's a public health issue. It's a substance abuse issue. We don't need more cops and more prisons and harsher sentences. Why? What we need is rehab, and we need more social workers, and we need lighter drug sentences. Ain't that been the battle cry of Democrats and Republicans alike? Whatever happened to Bill Clinton and the 3 strikes? Whatever happened to mandatory sentencing guidelines? Whatever happened to lock them up and throw away the key? Well, what happened is the new drug epidemic is overwhelmingly white. That's what happened. You're not going to see Hollywood deciding that they're going to do propaganda showing how dangerous all of these white meth dealers are. They're not going to be trying to justify harsh drug law sentences in the eyes of the public because that's what Hollywood does. They want to show how dangerous the drug dealers are. That way you go, ooh, we need more laws. When the politicians say we need to lock them up and throw away the key, you'll be thinking about the violent drug dealers that you saw in the movies or on television. That's how Hollywood works. One hand of white media washing the other. One hand of white media justifying the other. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this Chris Watts character started having an affair with one of his co-workers, and investigators are thinking that this was a possible motive for the murders. Now, what I want to know is anyone going to investigate Chris Watts' mistress? Clearly, these two were very close. So close, in fact, that this mistress, she was the one who told prosecutors that during their pillow talk, Chris Watts told her that he knew his wife was pregnant, but that she had told him the child wasn't his. Now, does anyone believe that the mistress's knowledge of Chris Watts' marital discontent was merely limited to that? You think that's all he told her? You think that's as far as he went, as far as talking about how unhappy he was with his marriage? You mean to tell me that she didn't know anything about what he was planning to do? Because she didn't seem too shocked or disgusted about all this. She may not be an accessory to the crime necessarily, but she was certainly aware he was married, and were she a black woman, she'd be in handcuffs and awaiting trial on something. They'd be saying, we're going to put you in prison for something. You're black, we got to get you behind bars. You were standing too close to him. And the story that's coming out this week is that Chris Watts is now being sent love letters. Apparently there are some white women out there who are so lonely, or perhaps some shea butter refugees who are so desperate for a zaddy, that they'll even take a man who murdered his own pregnant wife and their 2 children because, hey, who can resist a quadruple murderer, right? And the white media is feigning surprise. They're feigning shock at all this. They're pretending to be utterly and thoroughly shocked. How in God's name would anyone think a man like this is less than a total monster? How did this mass murderer become the most eligible bachelor in town? Why is it that there are so many women who see him as desirable instead of seeing him as utterly reprehensible? Well, the white media knows exactly why this is. It's the way that they planned it. Women see white mass killers as sexy and desirable because the white media doesn't focus on their crimes. The white media never focuses on a white killer's crimes or the pain that they caused. Instead, the white media will give you nothing but their background, everything except for the crime. The white media treats white criminals like some sort of weird reality TV show. You get to learn everything about them except for the pesky details of how many lives they took. Doesn't matter if it's Timothy McVeigh, doesn't matter if it's Stephen Paddock, doesn't matter if it's Charles Manson. Most people can only tell you Charles Manson had something to do with some killings, but they don't really know anything about it because the white media doesn't educate you about it. Ah, but they will tell you about O.J. Simpson, though, now won't they? You'll get that one all day, every day. Charles Manson is not focused on as the leader of a racist kill cult. He's focused on as a weirdo hippie who was a social outcast, and that's the narrative that the white media wants for him. All of the white media's coverage of Chris Watts' slaughter begins the exact same way, telling you how sympathetic this guy is. They start off spending whole paragraphs talking about what a perfect husband he was, and even after they reluctantly delve into his demonic crimes, they still mention throughout their pieces how devoted and loving that he seemed, and how he celebrated his wife's announcement that she was pregnant again, and how he had a good job, and he gave his family a good standard of living. They make sure to pepper that throughout all of their coverage, so that you never forget, no matter, as far as mentioning the killings go, they treat that as an afterthought. They treat that as a detail. What's important is you need to know how great this white man is. And that's the entire point. This is militant white propaganda on the march. This isn't news. This is OkCupid, the way they treat white killers. But this is the way the white media treats them. It's never about their crime. It's always about people who something unfortunate happened to. The way that the white media reports these stories, you wouldn't know that Chris Watts was the one who murdered his pregnant wife and their 2 toddler-age children. If you read the white media's account, you would think that somebody else did it, probably a black man. That's the way that the white media treats it. They treat it as if, well, this was something that happened to them, including Chris Watts. This is something that happened to him and his perfect family. Something came along and shattered it. It wasn't Chris Watts, though. Not the white guy. And the white media does this every single time they talk about a white criminal. This is deliberate and intentional brainwashing. This is meant to indoctrinate the public, to train the public mind that whenever a white person commits a crime, no matter how unspeakable, it's not that bad. He's not a bad guy. He's just a guy who made a bad choice. He's a guy who something bad happened to him, not because of him. The white media has made sure that all of their coverage of this white killer is fixed up and slanted so as to make it clear he's not a sociopathic killer. He's a devoted father and loving husband who had a good job, and then his wife and kid disappeared one day and they were found in a shallow grave, and, well, his mistress said that this guy wasn't happy in the marriage, and, well, I'm sure that he didn't mean to do it. Even Dr. Phil, joke that he is, he decided to do a little bit of chattering about this, and he refused to call Chris Watts a sociopath. Instead, Dr. Phil decided to downgrade him to being merely a narcissist. A narcissist? Really? Can you believe that crap? Dr. Phil, who is, allegedly, a psychological expert, he places a mass killer, a monster who murdered a woman who he knew to be pregnant with his child, on the same level as attention whores on YouTube. You see, these scumbags that you see on YouTube setting themselves on fire or shaking their butts in front of the cameras, these are narcissists. Chris Watts is an animal. But apparently Dr. Phil thinks that, well, he's not much worse than some attention whore on YouTube. See, that's what happens. The white media makes a full court press. Whenever the killer's white, we're not going to be throwing any sort of scorn on him. We got to be real careful with the way that we report this. We got to be real careful with the words that we use, because there are only certain words that are used to describe black people and other words, lighter words, gentler words for white people. So that's how you understand the color-coded news coverage. You don't call white people thugs. You never use that word. Not for white people, you don't. Now, black folks, you can use the word thugs all day long. In fact, you only use it in regards to them. This is the way the white power works. The same way that you see these alt-right clowns online using certain words as substitutes for racial slurs. Who do you think they got it from? They got it from the white media. That's where this stuff originates. And you see this across the board from the white media. None of the white media coverage from any of these outlets, big or small, was willing to call Chris Watts a sociopath or even a mass killer. They went out of their way to make sure that they did not put certain words on him. They were not going to have certain labels attached to him. He's white, so we can't do that. We're not going to allow it. But then again, this is how they operate. They refuse to call Timothy McVeigh a terrorist, refuse to call Dylan Roof a terrorist, refuse to call the alt-right terrorists or subversives, and they never call these white mass killers psychopaths, no matter how little remorse they show for their crimes. Dylan Roof is the quintessential psychopath, but you will not see any white media outlets calling him that. Not even your good white liberals will do it. The white media, and Dr. Phil is definitely part of the white media, they understand that where white criminality is concerned, the white media's job is not to report the news, it is to dictate to the public what to think about the news. They're not telling you about the event because they want to inform you. They're telling you because they want to dictate to you what you're supposed to think and what you're supposed to say about it. Just shut up. We'll give you your opinion. The white media, the propaganda arm of white supremacy, is not in the business of entertainment. They are in the business of mind control. They are the mouthpiece for an utterly sick and demented system. Corrupt systems like this, they don't have laws per se. The words on a page that these evil policymakers write out, that's not the law. The law is the will of the corrupt. Racial fiat, that is the only law. Corrupt systems only have goals. They don't have laws. Laws are boundaries, and the entire point of institutionalized corruption is to eliminate any boundaries to the immoral behavior of the corrupt. Corrupt systems don't have morals. Morality is the very thing that corrupt people gather together to fight against. The only thing that corrupt systems have are rationalizations. Rationalizations don't justify immorality, but it's not meant to. Rationalizations are meant to provide a gray zone, legitimate or not. This is how they excuse their sick, demented behavior, not only for themselves, but it's also how they excuse their behavior to the whole world. Yes, Chris Watts is evil. Yes, his crimes are beyond redemption. Yes, he's caused real suffering. And no, it doesn't matter a damn to the white majority. They don't see him as a problem any more than they see a rabid dog as a problem. Okay, so a couple of these guys who are enjoying their white privilege, they'll go a little rogue, they'll start biting some of the neighbors. But these are the messy excesses of white privilege, which they call freedom. Even though white people are killed by each other, you're not going to be seeing them talking about white on white crime. That's not a priority for them. Why? Because you can't associate the word white with criminality. You do not associate that word with criminality. You cannot say white crime. You do not say white on white crime. You do not say white criminality. White is always separate from that. You can say black on black. You can say black offenders. You can say that all day long. But white, nah, forget it. The white media has a racist code and they enforce it nonstop. You'll see the white majority of citizens in the U.S. who are far more interested in the faraway killings going on the south side of Chicago than they are with the killing fields taking place in their own suburban enclaves. Now, to a rational mind, these two impulses on the part of the white majority may seem contradictory, and they are, but contradictory doesn't mean that they don't occupy the same space, that they're not both going in the same direction and for the same purpose. Both of these habits serve the same core purpose, promoting and sustaining white supremacy. Survival is not at the top of their totem pole of priorities. Power is. Stopping themselves from being killed by other white folks, that's not a requisite for power. Keeping black people oppressed, however, is. So we will always be front of mind for them. Unless you think that this is merely a male tradition, this is just something that white men do, you have the second example of the evening, the case of Lauren Stewart. Lauren Stewart was a Michigan model who in February of this year murdered her husband and their 2 adult children before killing herself. So you have almost the same situation as Chris Watts. Now, the white media kept using the term Michigan because they didn't want to have to say where she lived. She lived in a place that was only about 30 minutes outside of Detroit. They just say Michigan. They don't say, hey, she was very close to Detroit. If you're only 30 minutes outside of downtown Detroit, that means that you're in the Detroit metro area. That's where this woman lived at, this whole Keegan Sound place, where the hell this place was, Kego Harbor, wherever the hell she was from. It ain't very far from Detroit proper. She's in the Detroit metro area, and yet no one in the white media felt the need to connect her to the city's crime problem. When the white media is covering violence committed by black people, it's all about the violence. You can be 2 states over. You ain't got to be in Detroit. You can be in freaking Canada. And they'd still say, well, it's somewhere close to Detroit, you know. They make sure to bring the word Detroit in there. They want to work the word Detroit in there so that you think black Detroit, crime Detroit, black crime Detroit. Okay, here's a white woman now. We don't want to associate her with that. Again, they're very careful about what they say, being very careful about it. Because you see, when it's black people they're talking about, they're not people. They're killers. On the other hand, when they cover violence committed by white people, it's all about their life story and their job and their family and their aspirations and whether they were having a hard time at work or depressed. See, they're not killers. They're people. So, of course, you have the same pathetic whitewashing and lionizing of the murderer by the white media in this case as you had with Chris Watts. Every single white media posting about her tells you that she was a model, that she promoted herself as a personal fitness instructor, etc. They do all that, go through all that before they even tell you that her last act on earth was to commit a mass murder, and that the victims were her own family, and that 2 of the people she murdered were her own children. The white media eventually settles on the same lie that they always seem to settle on whenever a white person has committed a crime: mental illness. She had a mental illness, you see. You know, with all these white people who are mentally deranged, I wonder if the white media will ever do an expose on the pathological mental illness that clearly is rampant, undiagnosed, and going unaddressed in the white community. Because they seem to have a big freaking epidemic. It's bigger than the meth epidemic, apparently. Hell, if you didn't know better, you'd think the white media was perpetrating a fraud or something. The narrative from the white media in the case of Lauren Stewart was that she was part of the Jehovah's Witnesses and apparently she was having some problems getting along with her fellow cult members. So they excommunicated her, and apparently she was so shaken up by this that she felt she had no choice but to kill her entire family and then herself. White supremacist hate site Yahoo, otherwise known as Stormfront East, reposted a story from People magazine about this mass killing, and literally the last half of the article, fully 11 paragraphs, were devoted to nothing but talk about suicide and depression and the warning signs, and People/Yahoo even went so far as to end the article with an entire paragraph saying that if you or a loved one is depressed or suicidal, call this hotline. I'm not making that up. They actually had the nerve to post that. See, this is what they do whenever the killer is white. Whenever the lawbreaker is white, it's going to become something else. It's not going to be about the crime. They're going to spin it into something else, something unrelated. This is how the white media handles a story about a mass murderer. You had Fox, obviously one of the usual suspects. The way that they went about covering it, they were sitting here saying that she's remembered as quirky and happy. They're talking about somebody who murdered her husband and her own 2 children. They make sure Keego Harbor mom who killed family and self remembered as quirky and happy. See how sick they are about that? They have the gall to put the words quirky and happy in the same sentence as killed family and self. This is how bold they are about it, but apparently they seem to understand that their audience, and the audience for this is white people, this is not being written for black folks, that the white audience that they're trying to reach apparently is very susceptible and sympathetic and likes this kind of thing. Apparently they prefer this kind of coverage when talking about white criminality. They're not talking about what can we do to stop the next mass killing. Instead, it's, well, we should try to remember the good. Do they ever say that about any black person accused of a crime? Does anybody ever say that? This is deliberate. How brazen they are about it, this is deliberate. It's to show you have to be bold about telling that white people are awesome even when they've committed the most heinous of acts. They don't tell you how vile and evil her crime was, but instead they decide they're going to awkwardly turn it into some half-assed human interest story about the dangers of depression. But that's how propaganda works. The whole thing about it is they got you just turning left, right, and center, not sure what outrageous statement they're going to come out with next. Propaganda is based on establishing narratives, using thematic hooks. You don't want people to focus on what the reality is, what the subject is really about, which is crime in the suburbs, because white people don't commit crimes. So you got to distract them. But to do that, you got to find a hook. We don't want the people thinking that the hook is the murder. We need something to mislead them away from what the real focus is. So the white media as a group, this is all of them, it wasn't just Fox, it wasn't just NBC, all of them, left, right, center, big, small, and otherwise, decided that this is going to be a story about depression and suicide. The white media wasn't about to allow this to become a story about mass murder. Now, if Dr. Phil wants to classify a killing as being based on narcissism, he would have had a case here. And you see what they say about her. What drove her to kill her family? So the white media template is that when white people kill, it wasn't them. They weren't themselves. It was something else. The devil made them do it. It was aliens. It was mind control. It was mental illness. But the point was, it wasn't the white person with the gun. This is sick. To portray a mass murderer like this, to sit there and use those words, what drove her to kill. When you say something drove a person to a particular act, what you're doing is you're placing the blame on that other thing, on that other influence, that other person, circumstance. You're saying that's to blame, not the person who did the crime. You never hear them ask, hey, what drove O.J. Simpson to do it? Or what drove Ray Caruth to do it? See, if it's a black person, you never say what drove them to it, because drove them to it means that they weren't responsible. You never justify a black person's crime. If you've accused a black person of a crime, you never try to justify it. They're fighting to this day to exonerate Aaron Hernandez of his racially motivated murders, and the bastard's dead. They're trying to find a way to exonerate a dead man. That's how important the principle is. Aaron Hernandez gets to have the gift of whiteness because he killed some black folks, because that's what white supremacy is about. It is about harming and killing and oppressing black people. So if you show that you're on the team for appearances, or at least as a pro forma matter, just on the surface, they'll go ahead and extend you a little bit of white skin privilege just for the sake of discussion. What drove her to kill? Unless someone else killed Lauren Stewart's family, then nothing drove her to kill. She did it because she wanted to. No one forced her to. But that's not to say that what the white media is doing here, all this misdirection, is a waste of time. The same way they have to keep up a steady daily drumbeat against black people, they also have to keep up a steady daily drumbeat for white criminality. It doesn't matter that Lauren Stewart's dead. The white innocence lie isn't meant as a legal defense or to explain a crime. It's not supposed to undo the evil act. Whenever the white media drags out the white innocence lie, it's not meant as being a solution for white criminality. It's meant as a social indoctrination method. Whenever white people come across this crime, whenever they read about it or hear about it, what's going to happen is they're going to be reading a propaganda line. This account of this mass murder by the white media, it's always going to be framed in terms of an innocent white woman who was overcome by some outside influence. She was driven to kill her family because God knows she didn't want to. Now, in this instance, I wouldn't necessarily slap the mind control label on this because this is a form of social discipline. That's what the white media is doing. They are disciplining the public, conditioning the public. That's what this is about. This is a form of social conditioning. The people who read and hear this, they know it's propaganda, but to be so blatant about it, it reminds them that the white media will aggressively lie in order to push the myth of white moral superiority. You're never going to have to worry about the white media treating you like those Negroes. That's what this tells the white majority of the population. It tells them that, well, see, even if you commit the most horrible thing imaginable, you kill your own children, well, don't worry. We're going to make sure that people know that you are quirky and happy. We're not going to allow anything to say that white people are somehow on the wrong end of a moral equation. That's only for the Negroes. The black folks are the ones. Hey, stick with us, stick with white supremacy, toe the line, and you won't get treated like the niggers, even when you're dead, even when you commit some unspeakable act. Now, this would be dismaying and even offensive to black people to have a media that operated like this, but that's because as black people, we expect the media to be a direct reflection of the truth. Our value system prizes truth as the highest virtue, but the white supremacist value system places them winning as the highest virtue. That's at the top of their totem pole of personal values. But it's not enough merely for them to win. For them, victory means ensuring that black people never had a chance to compete in the first place, and to make sure that this is fixed in place and never changes. Truth is not on the white supremacist list of virtues because truth only gets in their way. As Richard Spencer said, he told you what he thinks about being morally right as opposed to winning. He said it's more important to win than it is to be morally right. But the question that naturally arises is, how important is it to a white supremacist that they be factually right? Richard Spencer already said it's not important to be morally right. Well, does he think that it's important to be factually right? Are facts a problem for him? Do facts matter at all to him? Well, only to the extent that he thinks that it serves his power. If it can serve his interest, then facts are fine. If it doesn't, then to hell with the facts. Does reality matter? We know it doesn't matter to the white media. If reality doesn't matter to you, then the facts cannot matter either. Facts are just a way to quantify what exists and to qualify what is real from what's opinion or just made up altogether. That's what facts are. Facts are a way to quantify and qualify reality. And the fact is, Richard Spencer speaks for a majority of the white population in the U.S., whether they're willing to admit to it or not. The difference being Richard Spencer's willing to be honest about the fact that he is completely unable to make it without white supremacy. Richard Spencer is honest about it. Why does he want his white privilege? Because that's what got him every crumb of his daily bread. He would be helpless, worthless, and done in without it. So he needs his white privilege. He needs that. He wouldn't be able to make it through the day without it. He'd be finished without it. At least Richard Spencer's willing to come clean on it. However, the other white folks in America, they prefer to pretend that, well, white privilege and white supremacy is not responsible for what I've got. Though a lot of them would like to prefer to believe that white supremacy doesn't exist at all. Denial of reality. Facts don't matter. You see, white supremacy's given them an escape hatch from reality. Look at the horrifying condition of Europe prior to 1492. They save themselves at our expense. They tell themselves fairy tales about pulling themselves up by their bootstraps and hard work and explorers from Europe and American industrialists. Well, their explorers were nothing more than invading marauders. Their hard-working men were, in most cases, lazy slave owners. And their so-called industrialists were nothing more than vicious thieves who decided that they were going to take over some natural resource deposits. But the white media is not going to tell the public that. They don't tell the white majority that. And the white politicians don't say it either, and neither will their so-called white academics or even their white clergy, because without white supremacy, where would the white media outlets get their networks or their newspapers or their movie studios or even their websites? They wouldn't have any of it. Not without white supremacy, they wouldn't. Without white supremacy, where would the politicians get their bribes from? Where would they get their Capitol buildings and their government offices from, and all of the trappings of power that the politicians think they have? Without white supremacy, how would they have any of it? Without white supremacy, where would the white academics get their colleges and universities from? Without white supremacy, where would the white media get their TV stations and movie studios? They depend on all of it from white supremacy. So as far as they're concerned, reality, that's optional, only to the extent that it serves our interests. Reality doesn't matter to them. Survival doesn't matter. Winning is the only thing that matters. But as we all know, just as supremacy cannot exist inside a vacuum, so winning also cannot happen inside a vacuum. Winning implies competition. It requires competition. You can't win if you're out there by yourself. Victory means you have had a victory over someone or something. Winning means that someone or something else has lost. So who is losing? Well, we know that they measure whether or not they're winning by whether black people are losing. We are the yardstick, the thermometer. We happen to be the barometer by which the success of white power is measured. That's how white supremacy has always operated. That's how those who benefit from white supremacy, who are very much the majority of the American population, that's how they measure it. You get to a traffic light in your brand new Jag, and you got this white guy who's over here in his 92 Ford or whatever. He's over here in his regular Honda, and he's seeing you in your car, and as far as he's concerned, America doesn't work. This American thing ain't working. Why? Because there's a black guy who's making it. I'm falling behind. I'm falling behind. In other words, the glass floor that he's depending on, he feels, whoops, there's some cracks in it. I just fell through. So in order for him to feel as if he's winning, he has to know that the glass floor, which functions as a glass ceiling for black people, he has to know that it's still in place and that there's no cracks in it. He needs to know that the economic, social, and political guarantees that he depends on for every crumb of his daily bread are still in place, and that there is no threat. He requires constant reassurance. That's what the steady daily drumbeat against black people reassures him. Black people are still being singled out for punishment, no matter what we do or have not done, and that reassures him, okay, my position is still secure. Because if any of the attacks on us stop, if all that stuff, these guys would be slitting their throats in the streets because they wouldn't have anything else. So their victory of a necessity requires black people to lose. And if we're not losing or if we're not under attack, well, the whole world is wrong. The white media treats a mass killer like she's the victim, like she had no control over the gun. It just jumped in her hand and just started firing itself, and she couldn't stop it. Have you ever heard the white media portray any black person's crime as being a crime of mental illness? Have you ever heard the white media ever put the word mental illness in the same sentence as a black person who's been accused of a crime? Have you ever seen that happen? I haven't. The lie being pushed by the white media is clear, and it's very comforting for the majority of white folks in America. If a white person commits a crime, especially murder or violence, then it's obviously a mental problem. It had to be a mental problem, because white people would never do or say anything wrong. White people would commit absolutely no crime in word or deed, neither moral, ethical, or in any other way. White people are incapable of committing a crime unless there's something wrong with them. And as the white media has made clear, if there's something wrong with you, well, it clearly wasn't your fault. Something drove you to this evil behavior. You're not just, it's one thing to say that white criminality is an anomaly, which would be a bald-faced lie on its face. But when you say not only is it an anomaly, it is an anomaly that is not owing to any factors. It just happened. It's just some sort of wild phenomenon like lightning striking. It's just this weird thing that happens from time to time. That's what they're doing. They're not just saying that, well, it's not many white people who commit crimes. They say if a white person commits a crime, not only is it not many, but it's also a complete freak accident. There's nothing normal about this. Give me a break. When a black person is accused of a crime, it's always a rational act. And it's always done by someone who's completely sane. Apparently, there is no mental illness in the black community in shape, form, or fashion, to hear the white media tell it. And this is a deliberate lie, an intentional falsehood. And you can tell how consistently the white media does it. That's how you can tell. The fact that these guys are completely consistent about it across the board, they're all on the same page, operating out of the same playbook, and for the same purposes. Now, as much as the white media misreports on black criminality, you would think that at the very least, as a matter of statistical error, that there would be at least a few of the black people who they accuse of crimes being the result of mental illness. I mean, every time you turn on the television, they always lead the nightly news with, here's some Negroes arrested for panhandling. Well, you would think, since they're always trying to report on any black person who slips on a banana peel, you would think that they would, just a matter of a few of them, say so-and-so obviously had mental health issues. So-and-so was the result, the crime was obviously the result of some sort of mental health problem. You would think just a few of them would. We're the majority of people who they single out to spotlight as far as the crime blotter goes, and yet none of the black people ever makes the cut as being the victim of mental illness, not even once. You have not seen the white media report on a black suspect that way, and they're not going to, because they have color-coded language that they use. If you're a thug, that means black. On the other hand, if you happen to be a victim of circumstance, or you were driven to commit some act of violence, that meant you were white. Yeah, only certain words used for certain races. Both the frequency with which they show black mugshots and the slant of their reporting is meant to convince the viewer of a lie, that black criminality is pathological, and white criminality is some aberration, it's some freak incident, which has absolutely nothing to do with the perpetrator. Black person commits a crime, that was all them. You see how those people are? White person commits a crime, oh, I wonder what was wrong with them. I wonder what happened. Oh, this never happens, except it always happens. And this matters because, as I've told you, repetition is the mother of learning. What the white media is doing is not merely lying, they are indoctrinating the public, indoctrinating people's minds. You teach people by showing them or telling them something over and over again. You keep up a steady, daily, never-ending drumbeat against black people, and that is a key component of white supremacy's social conditioning. And when people see the white media consistently describing every white criminal as having a mental illness or needing drug counseling instead of incarceration, then this conditions the public to react to any white criminality as not being the white perpetrator's fault. It's meant to justify not doing anything about white crime. And then you wonder why it is that it's out of control and spilling out in the streets. And when white people see this, they feel better about it. Well, I can look the other way because I'm not really doing something wrong. White people are blameless when it comes to crime, and innocent as the wind-driven snow. As I've explained before, the Bureau of Justice Statistics has documented that white people are the overwhelming majority of those arrested for crimes, and yet they are all but absent from the crime blotter on the nightly news, and they are far less represented in prison than their arrest figures suggest that they should be. This is not a coincidence, this is deliberate. From the arrest to the parole boards, there's an entire system of safety nets, revolving doors, and escape hatches for white offenders set up to make sure that they're at low risk of being arrested, and if they are arrested, they're not likely to be charged. If they get charged, it's not likely to be taken seriously, and if it's a serious charge they get, then it's not likely to stick. And on the off chance that the charges are serious and do stick, well, it's not likely to lead to a conviction. And on the off chance that the serious charges actually do lead to a conviction, well, it's not likely to lead to a lengthy sentence. This is not flaws in the system. This is the system working precisely the way it's supposed to. And you can tell this is the way it's supposed to work because of its complete and thorough consistency that only applies to them. That's how you know this is engineered. Because when you come along and say, we're going to get these white folks put in prison, all of a sudden, the cops are like, we're not arresting. And the DA is going, well, I'm not charging. And the judge is going, who cares if Brock Turner did it? He's got his whole life ahead of him. So why has this not led to a nationwide outcry? You have slaughters going on like Sandy Hook and Parkland. You got white folks who get in front of the cameras and say, someone's got to put a stop to this, we're going to put a stop to this, and yet the nationwide outcry never turns in the direction that it should. No one's willing to speak the unspoken. See, you can talk about black on black crime all day long. You can go ahead and talk about black criminality all day long. When you say that there is a racial component to the white criminality that we see, and that it ought to be pursued in that manner, all of a sudden, well, we're not doing that. So why is it that when it comes to black people, you can point directly at black folks and say, it's you, Negroes, it's you people need to clean up your act. So when you say, you know what, there's a lot more dirt on the white side of town, all of a sudden, you guys, reverse racism, man. So why is it that the response from white people, we're talking about from white folks, why is it the response from white people has been so muted? You already know the answer. First reason, because the majority of people in this country benefit from the revolving door of white immunity from law, and they understand that they benefit from it. They want those benefits, and they will not see you take those benefits away. They understand that they all break the law. Come on. We all know we got some white folks, either people who we went to school with, or co-workers, or colleagues, or what have you, who will tell you about how they got traffic tickets and got out of it, or how they did some sort of stuff that you would have been behind bars for, and yet all they had to do was make a phone call and the problem went away. Nobody was going to come at them with some serious charges. And every black person has got a story of their own and their family about how all they were doing was going to the grocery store and they got hemmed up for no reason. They were walking down the street. This happened. As black folks have always had some near brush with incarceration, if not been incarcerated for practically nothing, no matter the fact that you didn't do anything. Every black person seems to have a story like that, and every white person seems to have a story about how they were breaking the law and got away with it. Oh, these are just flaws in the system? Can't tell by looking. It looks pretty damn consistent to me. And sure, these white people who are bragging about how the law couldn't touch them, they may not need white legal immunity to get them out of a murder rap, but every white person needs it to get them out of speeding tickets, or perhaps some domestic disturbance or domestic violence call, drug possession, and even the occasional homicide. Ask Laura Bush and Bruce Jenner about that last one. What's going on here is a conspiracy of silence. That if they all collaborate and they all support the legal fraud of white immunity from law, then none of them ever has to go to jail. This is the ideological truth that most white people dare not admit to. It's the wink and a nod culture of white legal immunity that binds them together. It's the glue that makes it where they themselves won't demand that white offenders be punished, because after all, very few people are going to protest in front of their own mirror. Yes, sir, there are none so blind as those who want to keep their eyes shut. And the second reason that there's no nationwide outcry is the white media. They're hard at work every minute of every day making sure that crimes committed by white people are never reported on. Out of sight, out of mind. This is lying by omission. Public outrage can be eliminated altogether if no one ever tells the public that something outrageous is going on. This is how lynchings went on for so long without ever being challenged. No one is calling out the white immunity from prosecution. No one is telling the public that this is a thing. Whether it's the Twinkie defense, Brock Turner, Ethan Couch, Fred Durst, Harvey Weinstein, or white cops who murder black people, the white media treats it as just one big, never-ending series of unrelated coincidences. Oh, another mass shooting, and it was another white guy who did it, just like yesterday and the day before and the day before. Oh, strange how that keeps happening. White legal immunity is a crime. It is a crime that there's any group of people who can break the law at will with impunity simply because of the color of their skin. And it is a crime that no one dares to call out. No one dares to say when this crime has occurred. No one dares to tally up just how often this crime happens, so that people can understand that these are not unrelated things. It's not all of these white people who are just walking into the police station, walking out with a smile on their faces. They're walking into court in handcuffs, and they'll smile for the cameras as they walk out free. These are not unrelated. These are not unrelated coincidences. White legal immunity is a crime. But no one's making an issue out of it. No one's blaming the white media for covering it up, nor blaming police for refusing to make the arrests, or prosecutors for refusing to indict and prosecute, nor judges for throwing out cases just because a white offender was in danger of actually being punished for a change. And just in case some white person commits a crime that is so heinous that the white media feels forced to report it, like Chris Watts, as we've seen, the white media doesn't cover the story, they cover it up. The white media isn't some group of dispassionate, cold observers. They are a hotbed of vicious, bigoted, biased ideologues. They've weaponized the media into a knife to attack us and into a smokescreen to cover up white criminality. And if they can't hide white criminality, they try to dress it up as something else. They insist on treating white criminality as some bizarre, inexplicable phenomenon, kind of like asteroids that hit the Earth, instead of treating it as the daily, regular occurrence that it actually is. The white media's lie is done, it's perpetrated in order to maintain the rationalization that white criminality is some freak occurrence so you don't have to punish them for it, because, hey, they never do this kind of thing. And the myth of blacks being disproportionately disposed to crime while white people are not, it's a lie that benefits a majority of the population. Focusing on black people is the only thing that has kept the white folks from going back to killing one another and repeating the catastrophic wars of the 20th century. It's a political mechanism meant to try to maintain something resembling stability. They need a social distraction. They need a distraction in their societies to keep their attentions off of going after one another. They need a group who they can focus their anger and hostility towards. A designated punching bag. Black people are being used as a political and social safety valve to help white folks blow off some steam, because otherwise they'd be blowing off bullets at one another. We are the only means by which white privilege can exist because, as I stated before, supremacy cannot exist inside a vacuum. In order to be supreme, you have of a necessity, you must have someone else who is inferior to you. And if you don't have someone who's inferior to you, then you have to find a way to take someone else and to attack them, contaminate them, undermine, deceive, or otherwise make that other person to be inferior to you. Black people are not inherently inferior, but we are being attacked within a system predicated on treating us as though we are. And that's the reason why you're not seeing this leading the news. You ain't seeing anybody making a big deal about it, and they're not going to. It's a big scam, and unfortunately there's a lot of folks who are in on it. A lot of people are benefiting off of it. A lot of people are eating off of this. Now, before I close out this evening address, I want to bring back to mind the Pike County Massacre. You had 7 people slaughtered at 4 different locations, and I told you about this back in 2016 after it happened. It was part of my White on White crime series. The narrative from the white media at the time was that it was probably drug related, and that means they were implying that there had to be some black men, or at least some non-white folks, who came to town and killed this innocent white family for no reason. Surely it couldn't be any white people who did it. However, I was the one who declared after this happened, and a lot of people didn't understand. Why were you so interested in this Pike County incident? It was just a matter of I didn't want to let this one slip down the memory hole. I declared that the killers had to be white, and that's why the white media, if they reported honestly on this, that they were going to find that the killers were undoubtedly white. And a part of the big clue for me was that they left the young children at the scene alive. So what that meant was they knew these people personally. Well, the crime was solved a little bit earlier this season, and the killers have been caught. The white media isn't breaking out the violins on this one, though. There's no profiles in human interest telling us how the killers are devoted family folks with good jobs. The white media's been mum on all that. They haven't made a big deal out of it. Now, you would think that a mass murder that took place just a couple of years ago, one of, if not the most brutal in the state's history, you would think that they would be screaming that from sea to shining sea, but they weren't. They're going to remain silent on this one, and they hope that it falls down the memory hole. And as it turns out, this happened to be just basically some folks who were having some sort of dispute. Apparently, there may have been consideration of children involved. Notice the wording that I use. Apparently somebody, I guess, this is basically an in-family child custody dispute is the way the white media is reporting it. But then again, as they lie about everything else, do we really want to be dumb enough to take their word for it? When you think about it, the truth of the matter is it doesn't matter what the motivation is. It doesn't matter what drove the killers to murder an entire family. It doesn't matter what drove these murders in Pike County any more than it matters what drove Lauren Stewart or what drove Chris Watts. We're not going to do the white media's dirty work and decide that there's going to be. We need to figure out what the justification is. The justification is they live in a society that doesn't punish them for their violence, and as a result, they feel they got carte blanche to take any opportunity or none whatsoever to engage in this violence. And until we start punishing it, you're going to have more of these things going on, not less. That's the ugly truth being spoken of that nobody dares say. When is it going to be okay to start talking about white-on-white crime? When is it going to be okay to say that, you know what, the crime blotter needs to be leading with white criminality, not just white criminality. We're not going to say that we're going to scour everyone else, but the point of the matter is the scales have been unbalanced for so long, maybe we need a few decades of leading the crime blotter with the latest person Caucasian who's committed a crime, because we've had too many decades of trying to make it where crime is just something that black people do. Meanwhile, when a family gets wiped out, whether it be in Pike County or whether it be in Michigan, not the Detroit area, or whether it be anywhere else, well, we'll treat it as a freak incident. We're not going to spend too much time dwelling on it because, well, this doesn't happen that much. Yes, the unspeakable evil that dare not say its own name. Perpetrated by the public, but promoted, propped up, and justified by the sick, demented propaganda arm of white supremacy, the white